I think we should talk about the commonalities between the Prince and the Discourses on Livy, because most of our discussion is going to be focused on the differences. But let us get on the commonalities first. I think that the essential commonality is Machiavellianism. And what I mean by that
surprise.
is that, surprise. No, but it's a bit more specific, because there's a concept called Virtu that he mentions in The Prince, and it was very much talked in his day, that is not exactly the traditional concept of virtue, but it was more like civic virtue.
Yeah.
And he was saying that traditional morality, the traditional cardinal virtues, ever since, let's say, the ancient Greeks, pre-Plato, that are justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance, they don't always get you the good results. And he focuses especially on justice. It's justice that he has a beef with.
It is.
It's justice that he thinks that it will lead you to problems and to circumstances where you cannot give solutions to your problems. And of course, then he also had issues with the virtues that were added in the cardinal virtues from Christians, faith and other stuff.
If I could say just a quick word about Virtu. It's one of those things, if you do an undergrad in ancient history, as I did, or classical civilizations, at some point it's going to come up, and the lecturer will probably spend 20 minutes talking about just that word, or more even. There's whole essays. You might be invited to write an essay just about that one word. And it's a little bit difficult, and it definitely doesn't mean virtue in 21st century English. If anything, it seems like, scholars and linguists argue over exactly what it means, but it seems that virtue may mean something a bit more like manliness. But lots and lots of things that come along with that are things like courage and justice and loyalty and honesty and all sorts of other things that we would, in our modern parlance, just call virtuous. So it's not as simple as virtue.
But you seem to be implying that it's not contained necessarily just within the person, though, right? It's in relation to your position as a citizen and participant in civic life. So it's because, I mean, a lot of what we call virtue really can just be contained within the individual, right? He does good things and that's all we need to know. But this seems to be an extended thing into how does he act in the assembly? How does he act as a judge, or when he's got office and things like this, right?
And I may add, it's also how we relate to the common good. From my reading, it may be mistaken, but from my reading, I think that what Machiavelli means by it is the tendency to promote the common good at the expense of your own good, which could be interpreted as manliness in that context. What do you think of this? I may be wrong, but what do you think?
In like early Roman, particularly early Roman republicanism, one of the main things that sort of gave you virtue would be what we would describe as patriotism. I suppose. The idea that you would put the good of your polity, your city, your republic, you'd put that above your own life.
And the Romans have got loads of... I want to say mythical examples of this, because I think a lot of them probably are mythical. Like the chap who's holding back, is it the Etruscans, by holding his hand in the fire and things like this.
Or just the example of the early legions, just the wars of expansion in Italy, and the Samnite Wars and the wars with the Etruscans, some sorts of things, that kind of, obviously, or almost by default, you'd throw yourself into death to protect your city. It would be the most unmanly thing not to. It would be, you would have no virtue if you didn't.
And we also discussed the dream of Scipio when we were talking about Cicero. And towards the end, basically, he says that there's a special place in heaven for patriots. That's the whole meaning of the dream of Scipio, the way I see it.
Yeah. Because another thing to mention that I think is worth saying straight away is that Livy himself was completely contemporaneous with Augustus
Yes.
They pretty much lived and died within a couple, 2 or 3 years of each other. So it's pretty much exactly that, which is the death of the Republic.
Yeah.
So Livy is looking back, to his mind, must have been or was some sort of earlier golden age of when the Republic used to work, basically. And so now Machiavelli, another layer on top of that, he's looking back at Livy looking back.
Yes.
You see? So there's a few interesting layers
looking
of it.
Back to someone looking back.
Yeah, well, just quickly say, as you already sort of touched on, Machiavelli himself lived through extremely tumultuous times and lived through Florence having a republic, overthrowing a sort of a quite bad oligarchy, the Medici family, having a republic for a while, and then that being overthrown, and so on. So an extreme roller coaster politically for Machiavelli in his life. So it's sort of great that of anyone, he looks back at Livy, looking back at some sort of perfect republic, whilst he himself laments, because Machiavelli loved the Florentine Republic. He was a member of a senior member of it, and so he wished that would come back.
And he has written a book, The History of Florence. I think it was the last book that he was involved in. He wrote The Prince, The Discourses on Livy, The Art of War, and the other major text was The History of Florence. One thing to note here, so I think that for Machiavelli, it's not so much controversial to look back to someone looking back, because he is not what we would nowadays call a historicist, someone who thinks that we changed by the times. It seems to me that another common feature that Discourses on Livy has with the Prince is the assumption of a fixed human nature, or of a human nature that is to a very large extent fixed, and it is so fixed that we can basically extract lessons from history and from everything else that has happened for the future, because there's nothing else we can do.
I wouldn't call it human nature. I would call it the dynamics of power.
Okay.
Because I think that's what he's really appealing to, because I think he accepts that the Christians in his own time were not like the pagan Romans in Livy's time. And I think what he's saying is, even though these people are different, they're faced with the same dilemmas, and they are forced to make the same choices. And the Romans have, luckily for us, already made a bunch of these choices, and already we can see the consequences of those choices. So really what we're talking about is how the mechanisms of power interact and what happens when something pushes on something else. You know,
I think you're right, and I think I should qualify my initial statement as saying that when he posits a fixed human nature, it seems to me that he posits fixed propensities, such as a desire for power. And a desire to minimize threats. That's different with what people do and how they act, because it's the difference between power and its exercise. We all have potential that is unexercised, but the power and potential that we have does reflect some of our, let's say, inclinations. It doesn't mean that we will act on them, but we do have them. So it seems to me that he would say that it is sort of fixed in human nature to desire power and to desire the minimization of threats, but it is also part of human nature to act differently in different circumstances and generate stuff that basically he writes a really big book on emphasizing.
I do think he is talking about the objective mechanisms of power, though. And I think a lot of it may well be in response to Christian moralizing, because I mean, like, there's no way that Julius Caesar was going to forgive Vercingetorix. You know, he was always going to kill him. But it's entirely possible that if Julius Caesar had been a Christian, maybe he would have forgiven Vercingetorix, and then Vercingetorix would have gone back to Gaul, and it would have been hell to pay all over again, right? So I think Machiavelli is kind of acknowledging the fact that human nature has changed, and that's why his books are so controversial in their own day, because the morality of the people is different, but the mechanics of power remain the same.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.